Most people think coffee is just a drink, hot, bitter, routine. But coffee is actually a global system of adaptation, shaped by war, religion, scarcity, luxury, and pure accident. The same bean becomes ritual in Ethiopia, survival fuel in America, dessert in Spain, and viral foam on the internet. And once you understand coffee at this level, you stop seeing drinks. You start seeing cultures. By the end of this video, you'll understand how coffee transformed into completely different drinks across history, culture, and necessity, and why each version exists exactly the way it does. Espresso is pressure extraction under extreme conditions. Hot water, high pressure, fine grind. It compresses coffee into its most structured form. Invented in Italy to speed up cafe service, not to improve taste, but to improve efficiency. But here's the interesting part. Espresso is not a drink. It is a base system. Everything else in coffee is built by modifying it. And the first modification is already a contradiction. Ristretto uses less water, same coffee. Only the first extraction compounds are captured. It tastes sweeter, denser, almost syrup-like. But scientifically, it often contains less caffeine than espresso. This breaks expectation immediately, because intensity in coffee is not about strength. It's about perception of concentration, and perception gets even more distorted when milk enters the system. Macchiato is espresso marked with a small amount of milk foam. Just enough milk to interrupt the bitterness, not replace it. In Italy, this is a precision order. But outside Italy, it becomes something else entirely, often sweet, large, and milk-heavy. Same word, completely different drink. And that's the first global distortion of coffee identity. But the real transformation begins when espresso stops being alone. Cappuccino is espresso combined with equal parts steamed milk and milk foam, built on symmetry, not strength. Named after the Capuchin friars, first in Vienna, where baristas called a milk and coffee drink Kapuziner after the brown color of the monks' robes. The name later traveled to Italy and stuck. In Italy, it's strictly a morning drink, because milk changes digestion speed, not just taste. So cappuccino is not just coffee, it is a cultural time restriction. And once coffee gains rules, culture takes over. Latte is espresso diluted with a large amount of steamed milk. It stretches coffee into duration instead of intensity. Originates from cafe expansion culture in Europe and the US. But here's the key shift. Latte removes urgency and replaces it with duration. Coffee becomes something you don't finish, you stay with it. And that idea of stay with coffee leads directly into precision again. Smaller than a latte, stronger than a cappuccino. Flat white uses microfoam instead of separate foam layers. Origin debate, Australia versus New Zealand. But the function is clear. It corrects the latte problem. Too much dilution. Flat white brings espresso back into focus. And when focus returns, balance becomes the next obsession. Equal parts espresso and warm milk. Cortado uses no foam and no layered separation. Originates from Spanish cut espresso tradition. In San Francisco, it gained a second name, Gibraltar, after the specific glass it was served in. But here's what most people miss. This is the purest form of compromise in coffee. Not strong, not mild, just exact middle. And from balance, we shift into full softness. Café au lait is brewed coffee mixed with warm milk. No pressure extraction, no precision. French domestic tradition. It removes espresso entirely and replaces it with routine comfort. Coffee stops being engineered. It becomes habitual, but habits can also become indulgence. Mocha is espresso combined with milk and chocolate, built to soften bitterness into sweetness. Named after Yemeni Port Mocha. But modern mocha is not geography, it is psychology. It is coffee for people who don't want coffee. And that opens a strange direction. Coffee that stops trying to taste like coffee. Café bonbon is espresso layered over condensed milk, dark on top, white underneath. It became popular in places where fresh milk spoiled too quickly, so condensed milk became the practical alternative. But practicality accidentally created something else entirely. The condensed milk removes almost all bitterness and turns espresso into something closer to dessert than coffee. What's interesting is that bonbon was never meant for hardcore coffee drinkers. It was built to make strong coffee easier to enjoy. And once coffee fully enters dessert territory, things start getting strange fast. Affogato is espresso poured over ice cream, and the second it's served, it starts changing. Hot espresso melts the ice cream while the ice cream cools the coffee, so every sip tastes different from the last one. It became popular in Italy as a lighter alternative to heavy desserts during hot summers. But here's what makes it interesting. Affogato barely feels like a coffee anymore. It sits somewhere between drink, dessert, and chemistry experiment. And once coffee becomes this rich, people start pushing texture even further. Espresso con panna is just espresso topped with whipped cream. Simple, but chemically, it changes coffee more than most people realize. The fat in the cream coats your tongue first. That softens bitterness before the espresso fully hits your palate, which makes the coffee feel smoother, sweeter, almost heavier. Drinks like this became popular in European coffee houses, where coffee slowly shifted from pure function into leisure. People stopped drinking coffee just to wake up. They started drinking it to stay somewhere longer, and nowhere embraced that slower cafe culture more than Vienna. Viennese coffee is coffee topped with whipped cream instead of milk. But the drink matters less than the culture around it. Vienna's cafes became famous because people stayed there for hours, reading, debating, writing. Some cafes even provided newspapers guests could sit with all day. Coffee stopped being quick consumption. It became atmosphere. But eventually some people wanted the complete opposite. More caffeine, faster effect, less ritual, and that created one of the most brutally functional coffees ever made. Red Eye is drip coffee with an added espresso shot. No balance, no refinement, just extra caffeine. The name comes from red-eye flights, overnight trips that leave passengers exhausted, arriving with bloodshot eyes after a sleepless night in the air. It comes from American diner culture, big cups, fast refills, no ceremony. This is coffee reduced to function, made for people who don't care about taste anymore. But coffee never stays functional for long, because sooner or later people start demanding something else: control, texture, experience. And that shift starts when espresso stops being just poured and starts being transformed. Cafe Shakerato takes espresso and treats it like a bar drink. Fresh espresso gets shaken with ice and sugar until it turns cold, foamy, and almost silky. The shaking aerates the coffee, which softens the texture and changes how the bitterness feels. It became popular during hot Italian summers, where normal espresso felt too heavy in the heat. But here's what makes Shakerato important. Coffee stopped being just flavor. Texture became part of the experience. And once cafes realized texture could completely change perception, modern coffee experimentation exploded. Nitro cold brew is cold brew infused with nitrogen gas and served like draft beer. The tiny nitrogen bubbles create a thick, creamy texture without adding any milk. And somehow, it makes the coffee taste sweeter even though no sugar is added. Cold brew already changed coffee by removing heat from extraction, which reduced bitterness and acidity. Nitro pushed that idea even further. This wasn't traditional coffee culture anymore. It was coffee redesigned through food science. And ironically, one of the world's most iconic cold coffees came from the exact opposite process: pure accident. The Greek frappé exists because someone couldn't find hot water. In 1957, at a trade fair in Greece, a Nestlé employee improvised with instant coffee, cold water, and a shaker. What came out was thick foam and a completely different texture than normal iced coffee, and Greece adopted it fast because the drink fit the climate perfectly: cold, cheap, and slow to drink. But frappé became more than coffee. People would sit with a single glass for hours. One drink could last an entire conversation, and eventually, visually dramatic coffee drinks like this became perfect for the internet, which turned coffee into viral content. Dalgona coffee went viral in 2020 almost overnight. Whipped instant coffee foam over cold milk flooded social media, but it wasn't new. The direct ancestor came from a small cafe in Macau, where a owner had been hand-whipping instant coffee into foam since the early 2000s. Similar traditions had existed even longer in India and Pakistan under names like beaten coffee. A Korean TV clip turned it global and gave it the name Dalgona. The internet didn't invent it. It just turned it into a visual trend. And that's the key point. Dalgona worked because it looks engineered for the camera. Dark milk below, light foam above, perfect contrast. Coffee stopped being just taste. It became content. And ironically, one of the most viral coffees ever came from something very simple: instant coffee and patience. Vietnamese egg coffee was born in the 1940s Hanoi during a milk shortage. Fresh milk was expensive and hard to get, so Nguyen Van Giang whipped egg yolks with sugar and condensed milk to recreate a creamy texture. What he created barely felt like coffee anymore. It tasted closer to liquid custard or tiramisu. The egg foam also traps aroma differently, making the coffee smell sweeter before you even sip it. That's the key shift. Scarcity didn't reduce the drink, it redefined it. What started as a workaround became one of Vietnam's most iconic coffee traditions. Because some of the most important coffee inventions don't come from abundance, they come from necessity. Scandinavian egg coffee mixes raw egg directly into coffee grounds before brewing. Sounds wrong, but the egg proteins bind to bitter compounds and loose particles during brewing, creating a smoother, clearer cup. The method spread through Scandinavian communities and later immigrant populations in the American Midwest. And it solved a practical problem: bad coffee quality. This wasn't luxury, it was filtration through chemistry, and coffee as problem-solving reaches its oldest form in Ethiopia. Ethiopian buna is one of the oldest coffee traditions on Earth. Beans are roasted over open flame, ground by hand, and brewed in a clay pot called a jabina. The ceremony can last hours. Because originally, coffee was never about speed. It was about gathering people together long enough to talk. Legend says coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia after a goat herder noticed his animals becoming unusually energetic from coffee cherries. And whether that story is true or not, the idea survived. Before coffee became productivity, it was ritual.